Hello, BookTube. Well, as you can see, I'm once again here with Hannah from Hannah's Books. And we are both experiencing slight audio problems. You might notice a little tinniness on her end. And you might notice on my end the sound of heavy construction, of drilling and wall ripping and whatnot. It's just going to have to concentrate on the brilliance instead. And what we're doing here is what we did last week. If you're new, if you don't know, Hannah and I are both book critics. We're both book reviewers. And we thought it'd be fun to go through the highest profile book review anywhere in the English speaking world, the New York Times Sunday Book Review, for good or ill. Just saying that it's the highest profile, the most important one, is not in any way saying that it's the best one. But if you get a full page book review in the New York Sunday Times Book Review, you've arrived. You've never been published in the Times?
No, I've never been published in the Times.
So we don't have a dog in the race. We thought we'd go through the book review for this week with the requisite hideous American cover, as I always say on my channel. So Hannah, you thought it would be good if we imposed a little order.
Well, after last week.
Because last week was just a bit of rambling, but it was so much fun. We wanted to do it again. So you came up with categories. Yes?
I thought we could start with stats, since last week you started with stats that you saw, and I had not thought about that, although I had noticed how many times Hamlet and Hemingway had been mentioned, but I hadn't jotted it down or tried to figure out how many, but not this week.
So we're going to start off with stats, then we're going to move on to Rants and Raves.
Rants and Raves, defined as you please. And then just like last time, we'll end with carts, of what books we want to put in our own carts or baskets.
Just in case any of you find it interesting, a lot of you don't take the New York Times. A lot of you might be interested in, how it strikes to indefatigable, incorrigible readers. So since you came up with the categories, why don't you go first? What are your stats this time around?
Well, last time you talked about how many of the reviewers and books reviewed were written by women. And I think that the New York Times Book Review must have heard you, because this time the numbers have changed quite a bit. In fact, in the nonfiction section, 6 of the reviews were written by men, and 5 of the 7 books were written by men. It definitely was different for fiction, although it was still 4 out of 12 written by male authors. The books themselves, not the reviews. And even the children's book section, both reviews were written by men. So I found that that they must be listening to us.
They could only benefit by listening to us. They could only benefit. I mean, we know, we've both been reading the Times forever and ever. We know the kinds of things they do well, and also the kind of junk they get up to. It's just as well. Where's the fat check in the mail for us as ombuds people?
That's what we need.
Do you have any other stats? Did you keep any other stats?
I did. It's not my husband, who is a math person, said this shouldn't count as stats, but of all of the single book or double book reviews of adult books, only 3 are not about the sea or the shore. And some of these books are explicitly talking about beach reads and what that means, and many of them aren't at all, and they're actually quite an incredibly wide diversity of types of books. They're about all sorts of things, including things that you wouldn't necessarily think people would read on the beach or on a beach vacation even. So I found that kind of interesting. And in fact, I've just noticed that my favorite section is the by the book section. And even it has a reference saying that her favorite place to read is on a beach chair with a big umbrella over my head and a little one in my glass.
Yes.
And how about you?
Well, I'm wondering, I mean, do you think that might just be that's what, I mean, the Times just goes at their review book room. They just, their editors go in there and say, what's coming out for this week of this month? Is it possible that that's not the Times, but rather the publishers?
Yeah, it is possible. In general, I have not noticed very often, at least, that the book review had theme issues, except every once in a blue moon. And certainly the cover of this one suggests that it might be quite consciously. Let me see if I can pull up the cover. Yeah, that it's your American book
Right.
cover, as you said, actually,
Right.
suggests that it is conscious.
And I noticed that the two reviews that actually explicitly open with a discussion of what or is or is not a beach read did not agree with each other.
Yeah.
It's like the authors weren't in collusion at all.
Right.
Well, did I have stats? Yes. Okay. So in the issue, there were 20 reviews. And of those 20 reviews, I have read 10 of the books that are under review. That's the only stat that I gave this time. I figured I made myself obnoxious enough last time with breaking down gender stereotypes. I thought I would just do that. I've already read one half of the books that are reviewed in this issue. If we include the book that is in your favorite section, that's in the by the book section, because the great Katie Tour mentions in that section that she really liked her now husband, Tony Dukubo,
Oh,
because
yeah.
he was a great storyteller, but that she fell in love with him when she read his book, The Last Pirate, which is about his father. I'm including that,
Yeah.
including that as a book, and I wanted also to totally, wholeheartedly second that implicit recommendation. It's about it's not about a pirate. It's about a marijuana importer, an illegal marijuana importer that was Tony's father, and everything that you would expect from that description, is not true in the book. You would expect from that description that it's going to be a kind of Tobias Wolff fathers and sons type thing. Miscommunication, men can't talk, men suppress their feelings. Here are some great stories Dad told me, and the book is none of that. The book is none of that. So it made me fall in love with Hunky Tony too.
Well,
The
I have to
man who got
say,
me back into book reviewing.
wow.
So
Wow.
it was neat to see it. It was neat to see that book come up.
Yeah, I have to say that for people who watch my channel, they know that I not infrequently lapse into personal stories about my reading or reading things that my reading brings up. And so when she talks about, her first date and falling in love over books and because of books, that was right up my alley.
That's got to be why you like the section most,
Oh,
right?
I think so. Yeah.
It's pure Hannah.
Yeah. I love to
They
hear
ought to
people
do a
talk about
booktuber issue.
why.
They ought to ask us for those sorts of things.
There's been a tag that's gone around at least a couple of times over the years, but maybe we should try to get it going again.
Well, I meant that the Times should do it.
Oh,
They should pay attention to BookTube. So that's my only stat.
okay.
That I've read 10 of the books that are reviewed. So we can move on to Rants and Raves.
Why don't you start with Rants and Raves?
Oh my. Well, first of all, I don't have anything in the way of raves. No sense encouraging people, right? But I have so many rants. Yes, let's see. I don't want to take too much time here. One, it's not so much a rave, but one thing that I was happy about, that I am always happy about, I always forget that it's true. And then the Times reminds me, is that they, contrary to industry belief, they don't ignore debut fiction.
No.
They ignore debut books. They give them full page reviews. The most impressive, the most consequential review organ in the world.
It has a lot of debuts.
They talk about debut fiction, and they do it seriously. I think there were a couple of debuts.
Yeah.
They got full page ads, or not ads, reviews in here. And there are plenty of review organs out there, smaller newspapers, people that don't have a whole room full of Pulitzers, the editors in that section will routinely tell you, oh no, we can't waste any space on debut. Well, okay, the industry leader can do it, so you can probably do it.
Yeah.
But
I wonder if the theme aspect makes it easier to say, oh yes, that does fit in. So
could be. I think both of the reviews fit. Both of the debuts, I think, fit the theme at least. Maybe there was a theme, and it just isn't being really explicit. But I do have a rant, and it's partially political correctness. It's partially the Twitter politics. So you just feel free to cut me off when I've gone on too long, because it drove me crazy. It just drives me crazy. It's the final thing, the sketchbook, the end, which is what's it called here? The literary canon has been using gender neutral pronouns for centuries. This is by Rhea Ewing. And Rhea Ewing, I don't know about the rest of her life, but in this sketchbook, she is explicitly lying. This is just a lie. It is absolute. Yes, yours. There's yours, only without the irate note.
I'll have notes on mine too, but no, they're not irate exactly.
My irate note reads, no, it hasn't. None of these examples apply to individuals. And if you look at the examples, this is Rhea Ewing going through extreme cherry picking in order to find examples. And in every single case, every single one, the group, the thing being referred to as gender neutral is a plural group. It's just a subjunctive plural group. It's not I have a specific group in mind. It's a broad group, the broad group that you would use, that you would have in mind when you say someone or everyone or everybody. That is a plural term that will take a plural pronoun every single time. So the Jane Austen quote, where is it? Everybody likes to go their own way, to choose their own time and manner of devotion. That's everybody. That's plural. I swear.
You froze for a minute, so I'm not sure I caught everything you said.
Rhea Ewing did a word search on electronic documents for the word there or them. Everybody.
I'm a lot more supportive in general of the purpose of this and the idea of reading oneself into books than you are, or seeing where you see something that you feel represents. But I agree, grammatically, I had so much issue that I would have said that these are, indefinite pronouns, and that yes,
indefinite pronouns.
Everyone, everybody, phrases like that do take singular pronouns sometimes, but not when they're talking about representing people. That individual, that it's everyone does not mean an individual here.
You are
actually came up with
understanding of the sort of thing that I am. But even if I were as understanding as you were, even if I were the best quote unquote ally in the world, I wouldn't want the point made through lying
or misrepresenting grammar. But I was thinking about the phrase. Okay,
experience is the name everyone gives to their mistakes. Oscar Wilde. Everyone. That is a plural term.
I came up with an example. Steve saw that everyone was smooching his dog, right? How about he saw that everyone was smooching their dogs?
Right.
These two sentences mean something different. And,
nowhere in Jane Austen does she use a plural pronoun to refer to someone who's claiming to be non-binary. And the thing that drives me crazy about this is the condescension and the lying. Drives me crazy. You see it in, for instance, well, you don't, because you don't care, but Star Trek. If a 2022 Star Trek, a fan of Star Trek who's been a fan from the beginning, gently raises a hand on Twitter and says, well, okay, but I mean, some of this is good, but does current 2022 Star Trek have to be all lesbian? Can't there be any straight male characters in it? The thing I hate most, more than anything else, is the response you're sure to get within a nanosecond if you do that, which is, Star Trek has always been all lesbian. What Star Trek were you watching? Where it's not just that you're claiming that's what it is now. You want to claim that it's always been that and everyone's been mistaken except you. That drives me crazy, absolutely crazy. If you had gone back to Oscar Wilde or Jane Austen or C.S. Lewis or Lawrence Durrell and asked them, is there any such thing as a non-binary human? They'd have said no. Once you explained what you meant, they'd have said no. No, there isn't any such thing as that. So they certainly weren't referring to it in these quotes. That maddens me, just maddens me. And it leads to ideological nonsense. I mean, Ezra Miller is in the news again on Twitter because he can't be found. he's evading paper service. Someone wants to serve him with papers and he's avoiding them. He's gone into hiding. And people on Twitter have been saying, yes, Ezra Miller is a piece of crap, but Ezra Miller is not a man. So kindly respect their pronouns.
Well, I'm going to just skip over that.
Yes, well, we should. We should. That was my only
that.
rant, is that this is just ideological, political partisanship in the book review, telling me that I have been misreading everything my whole life. And that drives me crazy, whether it's done in Star Trek or whether it's done in anything else. There are no non-binary people in Jane Austen.
If I had known that Star Trek was full of lesbians, I would have been watching for many, many years. So I've never seen it. So.
Oh, I shouldn't encourage you.
That's not true. I have seen a couple of episodes, I guess.
All right, well, I don't want to sell you a bill of goods. It's not all lesbians. Captain Pike on Strange New Worlds has not yet been revealed to be a lesbian. Sorry, and now you're hurrying to the TV.
Okay, so my rant was not my own rant, but talking about a couple of rants that were in the book review. And I actually have two, one, and both are mild compared to yours, I suspect. But one is in the letter section, where someone is calling a recent piece about Maggie Shipstead a peeved review.
Yes, I saw. I almost made that a rant of my own, but then it wasn't. It just didn't have the volume.
The letter writer basically says that critiques don't make it, the reviewer's critiques don't really make any sense. And she ends by saying, I imagine the critic came to reviewing through a love of books. I'm sure it's not too late for her to find that love again.
Right. Very, very disappointing that the writer is from Massachusetts. Very disappointing. Right. It's the same thing. I'm sure you've encountered it. I've encountered it a million times. This tired, again, condescending attitude that if you criticize a book, you must be that you've fallen out of love with reading. That that you're bitter at heart somehow, right? Those who can do, those who can't criticize, that sort of thing. Oh, so I spotted that a mile away because the criticism in the review were completely justified. And the writer of the letter does not try to defend the book. Instead, they go straight to attacking the critic. Oh, good choice. I guess we'll call it a rant. You're so mild-mannered. It's hard to call these things rants.
Well, the other one was in Ian Toll's review of the historian Paul Kennedy's.
Oh, yes. Oh, my God. I circled that paragraph. The ending of that review, that must be what you're thinking of.
Actually, I was thinking of an earlier section, although the ending is pretty, but it's pretty negative all the way throughout. It's about naval campaigns during World War II. And he complains about his sources and the abundance of citations to Wikipedia, which he pretty much champions, but not for an academic analysis. And there's this paragraph, let me see if I can, with 8 research assistants, enough to organize a basketball team, one wonders whether better coaching was needed. What on earth is going on in New Haven? Which is, of course, the city where both the grad students and the press, I think it's from Yale University Press as well. So I thought that was catty enough to make a very fun review to read.
Yes, and can I read the final paragraph?
Yes, please.
But what is true of maritime affairs is equally true in the profession of history. If you book the passage, you have to pay the freight. Scholarship progresses inexorably. Let a decade go by, and the price of updating one's expertise might be 20,000 pages of new reading. In a valedictory passage in his acknowledgments, Kennedy writes, quote, "If I have failed to acknowledge any other scholar's work, I apologize. It has been a joy to give credit in the endnotes to so much earlier writing and research." The sentiment is generous but perplexing. To apologize seems a bit much. Better, perhaps, to call it a sense of regret, a consciousness of shortcoming. And
yeah,
catty, you mentioned catty, it's a great word, raises another issue that always comes up for me, especially in nonfiction, in the book review, although it equally applies anywhere. Paul Kennedy and Ian Toll are direct financial competitors in the bookstore. Ian Toll writes only about naval history.
Right.
He writes about the exact same subject as Paul Kennedy. Now, the editors who are running the book review probably thought, well, that makes him a good get as a reviewer. I vehemently object to that.
And I think it's that practice that means that while you do sometimes get critics writing in here, in general, you don't get critics writing, you get other historians or other novelists or, you know, people who are not routinely book critics. And I guess there are advantages to that in a certain sense, because they can talk about particular themes that are of interest to them or whatever, but it also means that that practice of critical lens, which really experienced book reviewers have in ways that I don't yet, but hope to, you know, don't get to speak to those issues.
Yeah, it's an absolute scandal. in Steve's non-Hannah phrasing, it's an absolute scandal that they do this. These two are financial competitors in the bookstore. They have no business commissioning an editor from someone whose sales will increase if he decreases the sales of the person he's reviewing. The same thing with, you know, a debut novelist who has yet to write a second book being tapped to review another debut novelist. What kind of due diligence are you doing? Do these two people sleep with each other at Yaddo? Do you know that they did? Do you know that they did, that one didn't steal, you know, a bedmate from another or a scholarship from another? Do you know that? No, you don't. You're just thinking you have a debut novel, and so does this person. So you'll be perfect. And one of the results is the one you mentioned, which is that actual book critics who are concerned not with, you know, the 10th decimal point of Paul Kennedy's research, but rather how Paul Kennedy's book accounts itself to readers who aren't familiar with that research either. The generalist reviewer can cover the reader in that way, whereas what can Paul Kennedy do? What can Ian Toll do? He can talk about this book as a specialist talking to another specialist. He devotes no space anywhere in the review to what the book is like as a reading experience. Is it good?
That's an unfair way to review this book since it's from an academic press, but it's not necessarily the right review for the New York Times Book Review, even if it would be for, you know, the Journal of American History.
If Ian Toll wants to write about this thing and pick apart its sources, do it for Naval History Review. You know, for the people who are going to know already that you all will also have 12 books out on the subject.
Although,
bugs me.
Don't general readers deserve to know if the scholarship is shoddy?
But, okay, you and I picture, everybody loved the last time because you are the biggest introvert on BookTube and I am the biggest extrovert, and they love the fact that, anyway, it's two very different workplaces. But picture that you got this book. What's it called again? Victory at Sea by Paul Kennedy.
Yeah.
Picture that you got that, you know, in a brown paper parcel on your desk, and an editor told you, I want an 800-word review of this. Take a month and give me an 800-word review. You aren't an expert. I am not. I know more about the subject than you do, but I'm not an expert. I'm certainly not an Ian Toll level or a Paul Kennedy level expert. Neither one of us would have missed the emphasis on Wikipedia in the book.
Right.
Neither one of us would have missed the latest date of scholarship in the bibliography. If you're reviewing work of nonfiction, that's what you do.
Yes.
We wouldn't have made what your word catty is perfect. We wouldn't have been catty about it because we don't have a dog in the race. And we would have mentioned some, so to speak, oh, the baby's sound asleep. It's pretty hot up on her window, but she doesn't want to miss things. This review doesn't tell you anything about what it's like to read the book, whether or not it's enjoyable, whether or not those Wikipedia sources are well employed, for instance. Toll stops just at saying Wikipedia. He doesn't say.
Although later on, there's a moment where
oh no,
could have just found them out by checking Wikipedia. And it was like, oh,
yes.
turning the knife a little bit.
Yeah, he decries it. And you know, I love the Boston Brahmin Frost, where he says, oh, Wikipedia can be very useful. I consulted it glancingly myself once or twice in writing this review. Oh, come now. Pull the other one, why don't you? You go to it all the time, all day long.
Well, he definitely talks about how great a source it is for some things. So, I mean, he supports.
But can you imagine? I mean, It's the point, the larger point that I would agree, or that you raised, is that you can go from one end of the primary book review journal in the world. You can go from one end to the other without encountering an actual critic. Instead, you're encountering other people writing the same kind of book. And I think the reading public suffers from that. Because even if there's no hidden agenda, you don't know that. Anyway, do you have any other rants or raves?
I have a couple of, oh, I have a rave. I'll give a rave. I talked at the beginning about how much I enjoyed having the themes, and found even, I wonder if there's a new editor or something, or if I just didn't notice this before, but I found even the pairing of several articles seemed to be, one on one page and one on the next, seem to have links to each other. And I found that just fascinating. And
That
sometimes
was artfully done.
yeah, they weren't always, obviously done, but they do show up. And I'll just point out one, which is there's a review of Fire Island by Jack Pilot, and next to it, a new novel called The Shore by Katie Runde. And Fire Island is a history and a discussion of how place and culture are connected. And the other is a novel about a woman with an ill husband raising two kids. The thing that really links them is something that, to a degree, is almost underplayed in the review of Fire Ireland, but the sorrow and death and the impact of AIDS on the Fire Island community, which is talked about near the end, similarly to having a dying husband in the other, and both at the beach. I thought, oh, that's just a lovely little echo without being, big enough that everyone would necessarily notice or think,
Right.
oh, that's too constructed.
Right. No, it doesn't hit you over the head, but the fact that somebody took, that can't be random, because it happens all
Right.
through the issue.
Yeah.
The fact that somebody took the care to do that,
Really
I don't know
nice.
what their motivation was, but it has one big effect, which that is, it makes it wonderful to just read the review from front to back instead of picking around. It has a very organic feel to just reading it. And The Shore by Katie Runde was my cart. That was the one where I didn't get it from a publisher, and now I want to read it.
Yeah, it's definitely one that will be going in my cart as well. Although I did want to mention a couple of others. One is Rick Ragg's lovely small review of Emily Bingham's book on Southern Song, My Old Kentucky Home.
Oh, right.
And it's really full. It's a good short review, but it's got some really beautiful language about how this is a song that for a lot of white Southerners is, sentimental, and it causes tears, etc. And that some of the language has been changed, some of the lyrics have been changed, but nevertheless, it's still very much a song about slavery and the selling of a slave from Kentucky further south to an even more vicious kind of slavery. And Emily Bingham, as a white author, is trying to confront what it means to be a white woman who has, cried when she heard this song before, but now has really thought this through and is saying, this song really has to belong also to the people who've suffered from it and who still suffer from it.
That review was a good example of something that wasn't a cart for me, but it was a category that we don't have, which was a really good example of what we do. Really good example of a book review.
Well, it's a cart for me for a couple of reasons. One is I'm trained as a Southern historian, and so this is right in my ballpark, but also Emily Bingham is a friend of mine.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
We haven't seen each other in a while.
Zoom tells me that we only have a little bit of time left. I wanted to, last time I mentioned that the Gerber baby died. Last time I revealed from the book section. And I was wondering if you would indulge me to go to tell you, to talk a little bit about the rest of the Sunday book review, or the rest of the Sunday paper. In this case, we could do another obituary, And this one has a mini rant. This is Nancy Clark Reynolds died. And she was a classic Washington society matron, the type who would invite people, who would invite presidents and cabinet ministers over after hours to behave and just talk things out here in my home. You're certainly not going to have a scene in my home, because if I want to make trouble for you, I'm not a Senate subcommittee, but I know your wife. If I want to make trouble for you, it'll be trouble that you can't avoid, and you'll do anything to stop. I have the power here, not you. So you gentlemen, why don't you get together and fix this, sort things out? She did that for decades. And this is a lovely obituary, except for one thing that made me just, here, can I find it? There's a line in here that just isn't true. It just isn't true. Ms. Reynolds was one of the fast vanishing breed of DC fixers, known sometimes pejoratively as hostesses, who knew how to create social conditions to make those breakthroughs happen. The word hostess in Washington society has never been used pejoratively. That has never happened. That is more politicizing. That is the writer of this obituary saying, well, if they were called hostesses, that's gendered language right there. So it must have been pejorative. No one ever used that term pejoratively. It was the mark of highest power in Washington, D.C.
Well, maybe not highest, but right. Yeah, and it certainly has a very different tone now, and I suspect that's why.
Yeah, that could be. Could be. And another thing that infuriated me was a long piece in the art section about how Broadway's monsters need to be retired. They need to be retroactively canceled. And they give you a rogues gallery here of all of these classic figures, these people who created some of the staples of Broadway. And the writer says, Jesse Green is the writer. And the writer says, I don't believe in canceling art because of disreputable artists. A complete bald-faced lie. That's what the whole 3,000 words of the piece is about. Canceling these artists, getting rid of their works. Getting rid of their works. Let's get rid of a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. Let's get rid of Carousel. Let's get rid of anything like that if the person was ever a jerk. That's what the whole piece is about. But you bury in the second to last paragraph a blatant lie in case you need to cover your posterior. It drove me crazy. I look forward to some upcoming dancing and no doubt an umpteenth West Side Story. And as for the living monsters go, I genuinely hope they're for their rehabilitation. But let's make them the end of the line. It will not be a net loss to the culture if the space such men occupied and turned into gilded niches from which to demand obedience and veneration are vacated now.
So the argument is only that these people did bad things in real life?
Yeah. Yeah. Jesse Green doesn't try to say at all that the works themselves are tainted. They aren't. They aren't.
Because I think there's a place for a real criticism of the way monsters have been pictured, of people with disabilities being used as, and that doesn't mean that they should be canceled necessarily, but at least that there needs to be change as we go forward.
Right. No, but Jesse Green is referring to monsters of the casting couch, or bullies in the rehearsal room, people that throw things at actresses or actors or whatnot.
Sorry, yeah.
And makes the case throughout the article, except for that last paragraph, makes the case all throughout that since these men were awful, we shouldn't stage their works, even if they're long dead. I guess maybe the article is also saying that some of these monstrous practices go on, and that maybe we should shine a lamp on them. And that's absolutely true. We should. But the bulk of the article says, if we don't like the person, let's get rid of the shows. That drove me nuts as well. But those two things had nothing to do with books. The book section is the key here. So did you largely like this book section?
I did. There were a couple of things that we have not talked about that I rolled my eyes about, some that I thought you would talk about and you haven't. Luckily, I'm not going to say what they were. But this
has been quite enough ranting from me.
And I will wrap
your
up
own stat of books read. Had you read any of the books in this issue? No,
I don't think so. I don't think I had read any of them. I have a copy from NetGalley, I think, of My Old Kentucky Home, And I have a copy quite literally in my cart of the Katie Rants book. And I think I'm gonna get An Island by Karen Jennings, which is a book I hadn't even heard of before, but it was a really, really interesting review. So it sounded like an interesting book too. So I think I may look for that.
I just can't make my peace with NetGalley. I just can't do it.
Yeah.
I try, I go through seasons where I think, well, this should work. This should be perfect. But
it's been so long since I've actually filled out yes, this is what I thought of the book.
I know. I've never viewed a book for NetGalley. And I see my percentages that are just awful. And I think, well, I don't review for NetGalley. I review for 200,000 people. Right. Which do you prefer? Do you want me to do the one or the other? I'm not gonna.
And you can definitely put a link to your published review, which I keep meaning to do, but I don't even get around to that.
No, I always forget to do that. I always assume that the author of the book would rather that I remember to do that on Goodreads or Amazon than remember to do it on NetGalley where nobody goes. I understand they want interaction, but I
think I may have lost you.
The mechanics of the site are so.
I'm frozen to you.
Yes, but I can still hear you.
Okay, good. I think my internet is doing weird things right now. I suspect that's what it is.
It's the story of everybody that I talk with.
I have my door closed, and that may be the problem. I'll leave it open next week.
It's insider baseball. Most people don't use NetGalley for who are doing reviews, but I have almost never found it to be useful for a review. And the way that it could be made useful is so easy. It's so simple.
How would you do it?
Take the expiration date off these files. Take the expiration date off them. What good is an electronic file of a review copy, an advanced copy? What good is that to me if it expires 2 weeks before my deadline?
Most
I'm not even
going
to get to it until 2 weeks before my deadline.
I send most of the books to my Kindle, and they never expire.
Okay, so there's a way to get around that? I should probably ask.
Yeah, there are a few books where I can't, and I don't have any tech skills, so I don't even know if there's a way around that then.
I go straight to my Kindle, and that just freeze there. There's dead space. Not only can I not get into them, but I can't remove them. There's just dead space. And sometimes I'll send a book to a Kindle, and 4 copies will show up.
Well, maybe it's because my Kindle is so old, and it just
could very well be. Could very well be. I just have largely stopped. I mean, I stopped with Edelweiss right away because their site is a nightmare. But NetGalley, I was a little more tempted, and I know there are people out there who make it work, but it doesn't work for me. But anyway, so that was the book review for this Sunday, for mid-June. So shall we meet again? Should we meet again next week?
Be here next week.
More rants and raves, more carts. Wonderful. Well, all right then. I'm going to wrap this up before we get cut off in mid-sentence. That happened to me and Zach, and it's very jarring. So we'll wrap this up, and we will see you all next week.
Sounds great.